It was here, in the northernmost reaches of China, just behind this modest train station in Manchuria. Just a few steps from here, where from 1938 to the end of the Second World War, several thousand prisoners served as human guinea pigs for a secret unit of the occupying Japanese army. None survived. No man, woman, or child escaped the experiments carried out in the special Japanese Unit 731's laboratories. All who entered died, from injections of the plague, cholera, typhus, or typhoid. Some died under the scalpel, in the vivisections routinely practiced here. Others in freezers or gas chambers. The criminals responsible for Unit 731's atrocities faced neither prosecution nor judgment from the Tokyo War Tribunals at the end of the war. On the contrary, their crimes were ignored, and some were even protected. Now, near the end of their lives, former employees of the unit have broken that long silence with their sketches, clay models, and testimony to what went on during one of the darkest chapters of their recent history. It all began with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931, that blew in like a fierce wind that soon ravaged the entire Far East, and whose devastation would not cease until 1945. Manchuria was immense, with abundant supplies of wood, coal, and gold, a land rich in soya, corn, and cattle, and cheap labor. The first step in dismembering and dominating Manchuria was to complete the train network begun by the Russians in the 19th century. The ultra-nationalist leaders of the Army of Kwantung made Manchuria their special cause. They decided everything, planned everything. They even installed the already twice-disposed Emperor Puyi as the puppet ruler of 3 Chinese provinces that they renamed Manchukuo. The Army of Kwantung embarked on a plan to bring 5 million mostly young Japanese colonists into Manchukuo. Recruited in Tokyo, 16-year-old Yoshio Shinozuka arrived in Manchuria in the spring of 1939 and was immediately assigned to Harbin and Unit 731.
Before I left, my parents assured me that since I wasn't a soldier, if I wasn't happy there, I could simply resign and come home. They even told me that if it was too complicated to come alone, they would make the trip and come bring me home.
After crossing the sound that separates Japan and Korea, a Japanese colony, a train led to Busan and then headed north to Mukden, Changchun, and Harbin. The route was simple, direct, and safe. In Japan, Manchukuo was presented like El Dorado, a land of opulence, an easily accessible paradise. After 4 days and nights on the train to Harbin, travelers discovered a bustling cosmopolitan city that was carefully and thoroughly patrolled by military police. Harbin is not far from the USSR, and the Soviet giant was known to covet the territory.
We arrived in Harbin about 5:30 in the morning. It was extremely cold. My ears hurt, and my cap was frozen solid. It was on or about December 20th. It was so cold I couldn't even feel my feet any longer.
Indeed, winter temperatures hovered around minus 40 degrees centigrade. Recruited as a nurse's aide, Tahiji Tomahara arrived in Harbin with another group. He had no idea of the actual work that awaited him. Harbin was home to over 50,000 white Russians, many of whom had lived there since their parents helped to build the Trans-Manchurian rail line. Some now spied on Soviet troops stationed along the frontier. The Japanese army had long been obsessed with the Soviet menace, an obsession that led to the creation of Unit 731, the brainchild of its commander, Dr. Shiro Isshi. Armed with a degree in bacteriology, Shiro Isshi wanted to make disease, long the Japanese army's silent enemy, its silent ally. In 1938, Isshi undertook a vigorous recruitment campaign in Japan's leading medical universities to develop Unit 731's activities, officially designated as epidemic prevention and water purification. Inside the 6-square-kilometer site, a large square central building housed prisoners 4 or 5 to a cell, and also laboratories for experiments, where between 3,000 to 5,000 Chinese, Russians, Manchurians, Koreans, and perhaps even some Americans were used as human guinea pigs before dying. The Little Pingfang train station was extremely busy between 1937 and 1939, while the Unit 731 site was constructed and fitted. Only Japanese companies were allowed to work on the interior. Some of the Japanese construction workers would stay on to work as security guards. Yoshiya Shinozuka clearly remembers one particular late spring night.
You see, we slept in this part of building number 1. One time, in the middle of the night, there was all this movement of light. I could also hear the sound of metal, like the unsheathing of swords from their scabbards. Then the sound of heavy chains dragging, lots of rustle, like people coming and going. It was right outside where we slept, so we got up to see what was going on out in the corridor. We passed from here to there. They're just transferring some logs. Go back to bed. The military policeman ordered us. This happened just after they finished constructing Building 7 and 8. So they must have been transferring lots of prisoners into those new buildings from wherever they'd been kept until then. Anyway, this was the first time I heard the term logs used.
At the beginning, when my colleagues talked about the logs, they just used the word log. I wondered who they were talking about. But as soon as we were fully integrated into the unit, I understood that these logs were condemned, that it would end very badly for them.
These photos of prisoners who became guinea pigs for Unit 731 were discovered along with supporting documents in the archives of the Kempeitai, the Japanese military police. Countersigned and stamped by the Central Administration, these documents are irrefutable proof of prisoner shipments for use by Unit 731. Setsugi Naganuma remembers handling documents like these. A civilian employed by the military police, he participated in the arrest and interrogation of Chinese suspected of spying for the Soviets. His department processed their transfer to Harbin.
Dispatched for special treatment was how he described the prisoner consignments. My section chief told me. But dispatched where? Harbin. But who processed them? What happened once they got to Harbin? We knew nothing about that. Nobody knew anything about that, except that there was no way out of Harbin, except death. We knew these poor people were never coming back.
Military police units dispersed throughout Manchuria were suppliers who met the demand articulated by Unit 731. Matching supply to demand, which could be specific in terms of age and sex, took place here, in the Army of Kwantung's headquarters in Changchun. Once selected for special treatment, the future guinea pigs were simply shipped to Harbin.
When people were sent to Unit 731 for special treatment, our section captain received special favors and even got extra money. We received a citation. But the most important thing was that the captain might get a promotion. So the captains were very pleased when we'd capture spies and process them out for special treatment in Harbin.
Behind this long building that once served as Unit 731's administrative center is what remains of the prison. The cells were designed to accommodate experiments by injection. Tomihara and the very young Shinozuka entered the prison every day for the plague experiments.
Every time we went in there, let me tell you how our arrival was handled. First, we were met by two members of a special section who checked the identity papers of anyone who wanted to enter, because you needed a special pass with identity photos to get in. We presented our pass. A guard punched the time you checked in on a special card. Then two others drew their guns to accompany you.
We gave them shots in the arm. We'd fill each syringe beforehand with 3 cc's of plague bacteria. Germs. That's what we injected them with. After administering the shots, we would wait 24 hours and then 30 hours to check if the first symptoms had appeared, to know if they had contracted the plague or not.
After doing this a number of times, I started to get to know them a little. But I avoided looking at them. When one of them would stare at me, I did everything I could to avoid making eye contact. Even those who had stared at me, those with whom I'd avoided making any eye contact, well, by now they were unrecognizable. Their skin color had darkened. In only a few days they had lost a lot of weight, and their skin was so blackened, I had real trouble even identifying them.
They did their best to push us away if we were hurting them. When we'd arrived to give them their shots, they often resisted. They knew they had no way out. They knew that they were condemned. But if we treated them brutally, well, they tried their best to fight back. And so sometimes we would try to coax them into it by discreetly offering them a little something. Maybe a little treat.
The treat was often nothing more than a piece of bread that kept several days without spoiling and could easily be snuck in.
The terraced roofs of the barracks had been specially built. Small gas bombs were stocked up there to fire in case the prisoners ever revolted. They'd already had problems. Not in Harbin, but where the unit was first stationed, in Bayinne. From what I heard, there was once a prisoner revolt in Bayinne. And that's the reason the buildings were all so carefully constructed and equipped.
These comfortable two-story buildings housed the unit's 3,000 to 4,000 civilian employees. Some were married with families. The young recruits, like Shinozuka, lived in four-man rooms. Here, like at work, Unit 731 employees followed one golden rule. Hitoshi Tanizaki, who had just transferred in from another unit, quickly understood.
Even with the other young recruits, our roommates in the dorm, for example, we never talked about what we had done that day. Never. I did the same. Said nothing. You can't imagine. It was impossible to trust anyone, to exchange anything other than idle chat about the weather. Our fear made us mistrustful, even of one another. We were so frightened. We lived in constant fear.
Those who tried to leave the unit were punished exactly like deserters in the thick of battle who turn and run. And I, assured by my parents I could come home if I didn't like it, I had to forget all that. The only thing to do was resign myself. I certainly no longer had any hope of leaving. In this section, if someone got sick, somebody got the plague, for example, normally they should have sent him to a military hospital to be treated. But that ran the risk of divulging the unit's secret activity, especially since no other cases of the plague had been reported elsewhere at the time. So, if you caught the plague and you weren't an officer, even before you realized you were sick, you were thrown into the prisoner pool. And that's how some members of the staff became subject for experimentation.
1941-1942. Already conducting a bloody war in China, the Japanese attacked the American Navy at Pearl Harbor. 60 kilometers from Hiroshima, on Japan's inland sea, other weapons banned by the 1925 Geneva Convention were being discreetly produced on the picturesque island of Okunoshima, over 450 tons a month. The 2,500 people who came to the island to work every day, many were very young. Hatsuishi Murakami was 14 when he was recruited with 64 other boys.
There was a part of the island that was used for training exercises during which they did tests with the gas. And if you hadn't correctly fixed your mask over your face, let me tell you, it was very painful and very dangerous. These exercises were considered part of our training. Mine lasted 2 years. Yes, 2 years. Because it wasn't until the third year that I was transferred to one of the units that produced the gas.
Half of the gas produced in Okunoshima was shipped to Manchuria. Unit 731 conducted experiments with the gas. By 1942, the unit had developed into a sprawling enterprise. In Halar, for example, Unit 100 raised and maintained a stock of some 13,000 rats, enough to meet delivery of 800 white and wild rats to Harbin every month. They were stored in these deep concrete vats. Why so many? The young Tanizaki was assigned to their breeding and the fabrication of special rat traps for very particular use.
We used a metal plate about the size of a rat, to which we attached heavy wire twisted into more or less the same shape. Then we sent the plates to Section 1, where they were doing research on plague germ bacteria. There, in Section 1, they wedged live rats between the wire to secure them to the plates and introduced the fleas. The next step consisted of inoculating the rats with plague germs. The fleas contracted the plague from the blood of the rats they fed on, and so, in turn, became carriers. The fleas were intended to spread the plague behind enemy lines.
Since 1941, Unit 731 used the Anda Plain as a testing ground for biological weapons. This well-maintained headstone reminds us that human guinea pigs from Unit 731 were transported the 150 kilometers from Harbin in trucks, and sometimes even by plane, to participate in the tests. Access to the testing site was strictly forbidden to the local population. Suzumi Suzuki went several times to Anda with the prisoners.
They attach people to stakes and send in planes to bomb them. I mean, with bombs armed with bacterial weapons in order to see what happened afterwards. To see if the weapons could continue to be effective after the explosion. I wasn't part of the research team. But since there weren't many people who knew how to drive, I did serve as a chauffeur for them.
The explosion's only purpose was to release the fleas contained in ceramic jars. So the prisoners often wore helmets and metal chest protectors to protect them from flying ceramic shards, which might compromise test results. The payloads were dropped by the 731's platoon of pilots. Many had participated in the infamous biological bombing of the Chinese territory of Nankin. Shuichi Matsumoto had been in Nankin and came several times to Anda.
The only information they gave me was the target location. On the ground, there were probably people securely fastened by their feet and hands to stakes, so they couldn't possibly escape. But our job, quite simply, was to drop the payload and return to base.
Traces of the asphalt runway in Anda can still be found. It was used to fly in 10 to 15 additional prisoners on short notice. As in the trucks, the prisoners were handcuffed and chained together.
The payloads I dropped probably contained fleas, since we were producing so many fleas in the unit. The Yamaguchi section produced so many different sorts of bombs. We gave them a nickname, started calling them the bombers. The bombs we dropped were called Sacco, but there were plenty of others.
One February day, and despite the iron around their legs, a group of prisoners did try to escape. They were quickly captured and met their deaths on the bumpers of the trucks that ran them all over, as this sketch reminds us. It took at least 3 hours to drive the route back west to headquarters, with the living and dead piled up together in the back of the trucks. To the east of the plain, the road leads into the city of Anda. All along the route and in the city, the local nightmarish memory of the Japanese occupation is heavy. Stories of sudden epidemics, of polluted wells, of poisoned food distributed to children, of rats. Since their sudden departure in 1945, local resentment of the Japanese occupiers is unceasing and still highly charged. Upon return, one way to study the effects on those who had contracted disease was in the vivisection rooms that were created at the end of every floor. Only leftover plaster from the walls is still visible. The prisoner was laid down on a table and anesthetized.
At the end, yes, at the end, was a special room for experiments where the subject was brought. It was actually a hall for vivisection. Everything was tiled. In the middle of the room, an elevated platform with a hollowed-out block in the form of a prone human body. It had a raised lip or rim. It was, in fact, a vivisection table, conceived so that the blood would be evacuated and collected, disinfected, and later discarded. My job there was cleaning the body. I didn't even think with what. I saw in a corner a kind of rough scrubbing brush attached to a hose, and when they started pantomiming, I realized that they wanted me to scrub and hose down the body. Then I turned to the section chief and asked him, how do I do the face? I couldn't imagine scratching at somebody's face with a scrubbing brush. Just do it. And I did. The others helped me turn the body onto its stomach and then back again. Once the vivisection had begun, they told me to take organ samples to make cultures and also smears. The first time I did it, my legs trembled so much I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I don't know how I put up with it. Watching them kill someone like that.
1942 was coming to an end. What did people in Tokyo or elsewhere in Japan know about the way the war had been conducted in China? The Japanese government always announced their victories to drum rolls. But under their breaths, people whispered that the war in China was going on forever, and that exactions on the local population had been committed. Who knew that Unit 731 had grown into a monster? Who knew that the army of Manchukuo had unleashed its important stock of biological weapons on the Russians in Nomonha, and later on the Chinese in Changde, Nanking, and Amoy? By 1942, with Tokyo bombed for the first time, and the Americans fully engaged in the war, more and more Japanese were receiving the red cards that meant they too were headed for combat. Train platforms were increasingly congested with soldiers headed to the front. Before heading to southern China to join the military hospital to which he had been assigned, the young doctor Kenyuasa had heard tell that Chinese prisoners were being used as guinea pigs for military training sessions in combat surgery. And in fact, vivisection was widespread in occupied China. Yuasa himself participated in 13 such sessions on living, if anesthetized, guinea pigs in his hospital in southern China.
I remember very clearly my first experience with vivisection. There were two men. One was about my height. He was about 30. Nice round cheeks, wore simple peasant clothes, hands tied behind his back, eyes glued to the ground like someone lost in thought. My first thought was that these two were probably communists, with whom Japan was at war, after all. The other also appeared to be a peasant. His hands were also tied behind him, but he wouldn't stop whimpering and kept mumbling things I couldn't understand. When the director of the hospital, he was a lieutenant colonel, said, "Let's get started," the larger of the two calmly allowed himself to be led to the platform. And then he laid himself out on the table. I thought he would probably resist, but he didn't. He showed this incredible calm. And when we noticed this, everyone in the room suddenly got very quiet. Later, the military doctor standing next to me told me that, in his opinion, his behavior was proof of justifiable submission to Japanese power. That was the mentality at the time. For probably more than an hour, each of the military doctors took turns following the supervising surgeon's specific instructions. The nurses were also in training. Once the training session was finished, the military doctors and nurses left the room. And 5 new doctors came in and joined us, with the help of aides, clean up the mess. The poor man was no longer breathing. The aides threw his remains into a hole. The hole was not close by, but I remember hearing somebody say, "No, not here. This one's already full. Go further." And I said to myself that this must have already happened many times.
Ken Yuasa also sent bacteria samples of particularly severe cases of typhoid and dysentery to Unit 731. Moreover, Commander Shiro Isshi came to visit his hospital.
The scariest part, which is revealing about the state of mind at the time, was that these operations were considered useful acts. We believed they were necessary to the war effort, as we'd been told. And anyway, we weren't making the decisions. The orders always came from above. It was the same everywhere. We obeyed. Didn't think twice about it. Knew neither guilt nor remorse.
This attitude continued until the very closing moments of the war. In July 1945, when it was clear that all was lost, chemical weapons production in Okunoshima was halted because of fear of bombing. But Reiko Akada and the other girls from her class who had been forcefully recruited almost a year earlier continued helter-skelter to develop a new weapon. Reiko Akada sketched her memories of that time, when some 2,000 middle school boys and girls were obliged to produce enormous hot air balloons constructed of paper. These paper balloons were designed to take advantage of wind currents in the stratosphere to carry bombs across the Pacific to the American shore.
At the time, we were all sure that we'd soon be fighting in mainland Japan. Already, many islands had fallen. Attu, Saipan, Okinawa. There had been many casualties on those islands. So we all believed it'll soon be our turn. And then there was that song, Island Where the Bright Berries Grow, the island of Saipan. This song recounts how many people died on those islands, and we clearly believed it would soon be our turn.
On the morning of August 6, 1945, Reiko Okada and her classmates had already arrived on the island when the atomic bomb exploded over Hiroshima. They remember hearing nothing, but did see a strange flash of light. On August 9th, Nagasaki was devastated by a second atomic explosion. One day earlier, on August 8th, the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan. Soviet troops were now rushing towards Manchuria. The reaction in Unit 731 was immediate. Orders were given to organize the evacuation, to kill and burn all the prisoners, to destroy everything that might reveal the unit's secret activities. Only recently enlisted to train the young recruits, Sergeant Mizobichi would stay on until the very end. The prisoners, he remembers, were killed by releasing the toxic gas reserves into their cells.
Along the wall ran a pipe that connected each of the cells. I think that they simply did it like that. It was the young unit cadets who were ordered to call it the cleaning up. They told me that by the time they'd entered the cells, most were already dead.
They killed the leftover logs with toxic gas, and then they burned the logs. There was smoke for at least 3 days. About the time it took to completely incinerate, I don't know, at least 80 people. Afterwards, they ordered me to drive a truck filled with sacks of the ashes and bones and dump it all under the Sungari River Bridge.
This is the only bridge that crosses the Sungari River. Afterwards, Suzuki joined his pregnant wife, a secretary in the unit, who was packing. The destruction of the entire complex began that same day. First, the central power station with its 3 tall chimneys. On August 11th, the pilots were ordered to blow up the prisoner quadrangle.
We were the ones ordered to destroy it. We still had so many bombs. So, instead of dropping them from the sky, we put them all inside the building and blew them up. But they didn't do much damage.
So the work was completed with 500-kilo bombs. Except for the buildings at the entrance, the entire compound was quickly destroyed and on fire. Every day, trains left for the trip south towards Korea. The last train left on the evening of August 14th.
The soldiers at the head of the train were armed to the teeth. Under the direction of 2nd Lieutenant Yoshida, heavy artillery had been mounted onto the roof of the second locomotive. All this was done because we expected to encounter Russian parachute troops somewhere along the route.
Colonel Ota installed himself in the middle of the train, carrying with him some 60 platinum ingots. Before leaving, he ordered everyone to destroy photos and other documents that could prove their affiliation with Unit 731. The next day, August 15th, the Emperor announced on the radio that the war was finished. They arrived in Busan 5 days later, where, to their surprise, Shiro Isshi was waiting. he had organized safe passage to Japan for the entire unit. Upon their arrival, the groups were separated and each made their own way home. One group took the mountain route to reach Tokyo without detection. At night, they stopped at selected temples. In 2 Ford trucks, they were carrying the platinum ingots and trunks of documents destined for Shiro Isshi. Arriving in Tokyo at the end of the month of August, they discovered a city destroyed by Allied bomb attacks, and its citizens awaiting the arrival of the new American master. As planned, the cargo was delivered to the military university hospital.
Just before the dispersion, Colonel Ota gave us an order. If asked, say only that the unit's activities were epidemic prevention and water purification. That's all. The order was very clear, very precise.
On the morning of September 2nd, on the deck of the USS Missouri, the Japanese Minister of Foreign Affairs signed the official act of unconditional surrender. With the war over, 6.5 million Japanese civilians and military personnel were repatriated from all over the Far East. They returned to a devastated country and a ravaged society. And then, in the face of thorough and rapid economic reconstruction, the story of Unit 731 remains like a scab that refuses to heal, a Kizu, as the Japanese would say, that continues to suppress a nation's collective memory. These images of the return and DDT disinfection date from 1946, the year the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal began. The leaders of Unit 731 were never prosecuted. Not one single condemnation concerned their activities. The unit's ironclad organization was able to suppress anyone tempted to break the silence, especially among the younger recruits. What of the results of over 15 years of experiments? What became of them? Who took possession of them? At what price? And to do what with? After the war, Shiro Isshi, the leader most responsible for the atrocities committed by Unit 731, calmly ran a family hotel, dying in 1957.
I often ask myself why they weren't judged at the Tokyo post-war tribunal. It's like a millstone around our necks and keeps us from shedding light on our past. Now the Chinese are bringing legal action against the Japanese. If the crimes had been revealed and tried at the time, all this would have been cleared up long ago.
Many people don't know anything about this war, this invasion. Some say it never could have happened. They say people would have found out that we would never have allowed military doctors to cut people up like that. What's terrible is the ignorance about what really went on there. People don't know anything about this war.
In the city of Harbin, signs of the Japanese occupation are few, and those intermingled with remnants of the previous Russian presence here. But behind the small Pingfang train station, the 6-square-kilometer unit site is slowly being recuperated in order to create a memorial, and steps have been taken to include it on the World Heritage List. In the basement of the only remaining building, an exhibit of wax figurines recounts the plague epidemic propagated by rats who survived the camp's destruction, that broke out after the war and killed over 20,000 people in the region. Work by Chinese, American, and Japanese historians has slowly revealed and clarified the details of what happened here. Today, historian Masataka Mori meets a woman whose father and uncle were sent to Unit 731 to serve as guinea pigs, as special treatment shipping orders concerning her father and recovered in police archives prove. Masataka Mori often comes to Harbin to pursue his research. One of the classes he teaches in a Japanese university includes the sordid history of Unit 731.
A survey was conducted by Chinese universities about the Japanese invasion. The Chinese were asked, "What do you think was the most revolting and violent aspect of the Japanese invasion?" The most frequent responses were, number 1, the massacre at Nankin. Number 2, Unit 731. The third was the forced deportations. Then, the comfort women. And then, the politics of the opium trade.
In his opening lecture, Mori always takes time to assure his students that there is nothing surprising about how little they know about the events that took place in Harbin. Of the 9 different history textbooks used in Japanese secondary schools, only one includes the 15 years of criminal activities in Unit 731. Like other Japanese who dare speak out, Masataka Mori sometimes receives menacing letters from right-wing extremist groups. Insulting attacks have been broadcast over loudspeakers in front of his home. Mori has become very prudent. It is his habit, for example, to never approach the edge of the platform before the train comes to a full stop. For those who would wish to bear witness, to share their memories, the will to speak out often encounters obstacles that are difficult to overcome.
The ghosts still haunt me. Once I donated a statue of Buddha to our temple. My wife wrote a 280-character text that was engraved onto a stone. I remember at about this time, my old commanding officer, who was still alive at the time, told me, "Suzuki, the ghosts still haunt you because you remain silent. Tell the truth, say what you know. You'll feel better for it." But even today, I have trouble talking about it. We killed all these people. We killed them with toxic gas. So many of them. So many were killed.
Japan has officially recognized the existence of Unit 731, but to this day has still not acknowledged the criminal activities that went on there. A large step forward was made at the end of the 20th century, when Tokyo agreed to rid China of the innumerable stockpiles of chemical weapons they stored there during the war. Of the 23 sites that have been uncovered, excavated, and cleaned by Japanese teams, over half are located in the provinces of northern China, in the former Japanese colony of Manchukuo. The largest stockpile remains to be destroyed. Located just southwest of Harbin, less than 300 kilometers from the Russian city of Vladivostok. More than 1 million bombs still sleep here, under these hills.